So anyway, we want to get started today on the presentation. I'm Christine Sosko. I'm the Director of Environmental Health. And Environmental Health is the one that's putting forward phase 2 of the cleanup. And so we're really excited today to have CalRecycle with us and very appreciative. We have 2 of their engineers that have been working on the cleanups, and they have quite a wealth of information and knowledge. And I think you just finished Paradise, right?
The debris is off the ground, yes.
Debris is all off the ground in Paradise, so that's a huge accomplishment. So we've got Bob Healy here, and we've also got Mustafa Modens, and they're going to give us just a presentation, an overview of the debris removal process, and then after that we're going to just open it up to questions and answers. I know a lot of you have questions and such. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bob.
We're not going to add an account.
No, please. Should we turn on the light?
To help you feel a bit better,
see it?
I'm not going to be talking for 2 hours. All right?
Is that too dark?
There's not 2 hours of talk here.
That? Can you see in the back?
My name is Bob Healy. I'm an engineer with CalRecycle. I've been working for CalRecycle for 5 years. Before that, I was an environmental engineer working for various consulting firms. And for the 5 years that I've been working for CalRecycle, I've done 5 years worth of fire debris cleanups. These last 5 years have been devastating, as you all know, for the state of California, for citizens around the state who have lost homes due to wildfires. I'm now, my role now with the agency, we're part of Cal EPA, CalRecycle. We permit landfills and composting facilities and whatnot, and we're called CalRecycle because we push recycling. And that's part of what we're doing as part of our programs here for the cleanups, is we do try to do as much recycling of the metals and the concrete as we can. We're pretty successful in doing that. That's all on the side. That has nothing to do with what you guys are here to focus on. One thing I mentioned is since 2007, CalRecycle has been responsible for cleanup when we've been called on by the governor's office to come in and clean properties. We've done 22 cleanups since the inception of our program, just in the last 12 years. And so as we've been doing cleanups, we've been learning as we go to improve upon our process. And the process that we're presenting today, that we share with counties for private participation in cleaning up their own properties, is something that has evolved through the years based on our experience. The goal, this is Valley Fire back in 2015, is to take these properties and make them look like they're usable to rebuild again in as quick and as safe a manner as we can. This is a perfect example of what you've seen and what you know of from your past fire and your current experience. As you've signed up for the programs, assuming you have signed up, you've been given a description of how the program is run. And this is what I'll be presenting today on your program. The county has started the hazmat suite for removal of hazardous materials, household hazardous waste materials from their properties. They've hired a contractor to come in and remove those items. It's probably 90% of all the hazardous waste is being removed. Your buildings may have collapsed on some hazardous waste that you might not have been able to see. So just be aware under the roofs and shed roofs and walls and whatnot, from a garage, from your storage sheds on site, there may be some hazardous materials in there that were not removed. It wasn't not removed because they were avoiding it, but they couldn't find it all buried in the ash and debris. So just be aware of that, and that's another reason why you need a contractor who knows what he's or she is doing out in the field. The first step for phase 2 is assessing the property, taking a look. I'll go through these real quickly now, and I'll have some slides addressing each of these areas. But you need to document what's on the site as you see it now. Document where the ash footprints are of the buildings. Document where we can make these available, slides available through the county, and you'd like to have copies of these too.
That would be good.
So we'll make, they have copies right now. So whatever will help you in the process. Site assessments and documenting what was there before you start removing will help everyone know where to look after you've cleaned it up, to take your soil samples, to know where the ash was so you can verify that it's no longer dirty. It helps the county know what it looked like before, and then when they come on your property, if they need to, they can see that you've cleaned it all up. So this is really critical to know what you have there to start with before it's taken away, so you don't know where, then you don't know what was there. They've also asked you put together a work plan on how you're going to do your cleanup, who you're going to use for your contractors, for the asbestos removal, for the soil sampling, and the removal of the ash and debris. And so follow closely the work plan application and cleanup work. If you have questions, the county can answer questions specifically, and if you've got questions today based on that, we'd be happy to answer those with the county. One of the first things you do is to have a certified asbestos consultant evaluate your property. If your property was built, or any structure on your property was built before the mid to late 1980s, there's a possibility that there are tiles or roof tiles, floor tiles, walls that used asbestos. There could be asbestos piping, transite pipe, etc. It was built well beyond that. There's a lesser likelihood for asbestos, but asbestos was no longer manufactured, but it was still sold after the late 1980s. It depends on the Home Depot whether they still had a pile of it to sell in their stores. So the age of the property helps to know the likelihood of asbestos. The asbestos needs to be taken to a disposal site that can receive asbestos. It's a special permit that the landfill's Cloverfield, did you say?
Clover Flat.
Clover Flat is permitted to take asbestos, and who else? Central is also.
Both of them into quantities.
But they need to be taken and double bagged by your asbestos contractor, taken properly, bagged separately, and taken told to the landfill where they need to dispose of it. It's for the safety of the landfill operators as well as those who are transporting it. There's chimneys to be knocked down. There may be walls to be knocked down as well. The county is going to be working on, typically, when we're doing the cleanup operation, we have to get air permits. When we're doing 1,000 properties, we need to get the Air Resources Board or the Air District to allow us to knock those walls down because of potential release of dust and asbestos. The county is looking into that on the residents' behalf right now. That's something they'll work on taking care of. Then you'll start, typically we would take separate the metals out, take those and recycle those, take the ash and debris, wrap those up, get them nice and wet so we don't have dust coming off on the freeways or exposed to the workers or to the community that you're driving through, and take it to the landfill. We take ash, debris, and concrete. Typically, concrete is removed because it's exposed to high temperatures and basically makes it brittle and not really usable to support a new structure. You can't really put in typically you can't put it in bolts and whatnot. It's just not helpful for moving on with your use of your property. Then we typically take the 3 to 6 inches of soil from the top within the footprint of the ash cloud, if you will, because when you're moving the materials around, it gets mixed into the top of the soil. So you want to make sure that ash is not is removed and it's not still there to expose you and your family to. They'll do soil sampling afterwards and to verify that there's no heavy metals or asbestos still in it, and then whatever erosion control that you require before you decide to rebuild. Sometimes people will wait a year, the permits take a while, so we recommend you put erosion control down to minimize how much soil could be eroded in the rain season coming up. That's just a quick overview. Dust control is the key to post-fire debris cleanup. Water your property down really well before you get started digging through it, because the dust will come up and the plumes are exposing yourself and your neighbors in the community to asbestos or heavy metals. This is the best control system. Is water, keeping it wet as you're filling the truck. It also keeps it from disseminating ash and dust as it's driving down to the landfill on the freeways and then dumping at the landfill and potentially exposing landfill operators. You can almost not use too much water. It's an important aspect of cleaning up your property. So dust control or water down before you do your site assessments, before you do anything on the property, especially when they're removing the asbestos, you need to make sure that there's enough water down to minimize the dust being released. And of course, during debris removal. Site assessments. Draw a map that shows you, when you're drawing this map, take a entrance to your driveway or some fixed point, some major tree, something that's not going to be removed that you can pace off from, so we know exactly where the structure was. When you remove the ash and debris and the soil, the concrete, it's not going to be necessarily evident where the building was. And so know where the entrance to your facility, to your property was, pace it off of the tree or whatever, just to give yourself and those who are taking the soil samples an idea of where to take the samples. It might be helpful while you're doing the debris cleanup is to put some stakes around the edges to help you know exactly where you need to take those soil samples. The site assessment also, you need to look at, make sure you know if the properties are smaller, where the property lines really are, not where the fences were necessarily. Talking about sometimes fences kind of move depending on when the homeowners moved in there, purchased the property. I'm not going into that, but it happens, and we've had issues at some of these cleanups because of it. Locate your septic tanks. Let the contractor who's going to be, if you have septic tanks on the property, anybody here have septic tanks on the property? Those can be easily damaged with heavy equipment. Make sure that the contractors know where they are. Tape it off. You don't want to damage that, because you don't want to put in a new septic tank or leach field. Locate your utilities. If you have underground utilities on site, at least mark them from the roadway. Those utilities, because they come up into the building, will get damaged. Those electrical lines, if they're buried, will be damaged. The water lines will be damaged if they were damaged by the fire. You'll likely need to replace them back down to the street or wherever your box is, outside of the footprint anyway. Your equipment will probably damage more of the pipelines. You'll need to replace it wherever you're going to put your new structures anyway. But you need to make sure that utilities are found and that you verify with the electrical and the water that the water lines are shut off, that the electrical is off, cable is not inactivated. You don't want to hurt somebody while they're doing the cleanup. And identify any hazards, overhead lines, if there's anything. You want to make sure the contractor is aware of that to make sure that he doesn't hurt himself or his staff. And again, the asbestos any known asbestos areas. It's great to mark whatever you have, mark up your map, know what was where the garage was, because the garage might be where you kept all your chemicals. That's an area that might show up when you're taking your soil samples. Where vehicles are scattered on your site, mark those vehicles on your map, because of the lead that you find that comes from the batteries. Those need to be, that area needs to be cleaned up, and underneath those, where the vehicles were located, whether they're ATVs, boats, any kind of engines, any kind of batteries that could have burned up in the fire will leave remnants of lead and lead acid. I don't know why it didn't show up. Okay. So work the application process, follow the work plan checklist. Make sure that all the items that are required in your checklist are addressed. Your site map for the removal of the materials. When you, it will also require a map of where you're planning on taking the soil samples, indicating that they are within the ash footprints. You'll need to include the asbestos testing, the analysis, what happened to the ash, just a summary of what happened on your property to let the county know what you did by step, as they list in their table of contents requirements. Just confirming everything that you did following the protocol. Asbestos, like I mentioned, transite siding and pipes, ceiling, wall. Sometimes it's in the chimney mortar. Sometimes it's in the flue itself in the chimneys. The chimneys are standing. You can knock those down and sample those, and send those samples to verify the asbestos is not in the chimney itself. And then have that asbestos removed by asbestos certified contractor who is certified to remove hazardous waste. He'll double bag it and take it to the appropriate disposal site. Chimneys we talked about. There's aluminum didn't last very long in these fires. It melts down and it looks like putty, puddles up. Metals are typically, we would put those all together and sell it. You can, depending on the local metals recycler, sometimes you can get a little bit of money for it, but you need to wash them off, wash the metals off as much as you can to get the ash and debris off of it, so you're not exposing the people at the recycling center to the ash and debris and heavy metals and asbestos.
How do you not expose the creeks and waterways by doing that?
Because you're going to pick it up and remove it before you leave, before you're done. Are you going to not expose the waterways because you're removing it from the property?
I don't want to wash it off.
Well, you're not going to wash it into the creek. If you're using water anyway, right? And you're using water for dust control, you will not wash it. You wash it off like you're washing your driveway, right? You're just getting enough off. You're not getting enough water. This is all off in the actual footprint typically. I don't know what your particular situation is. We can talk about that. But there's not enough water to have runoff from your property. It's typically what happens.
Well, if you have a runoff, you're using too much water. So you have to cut back and just use it to boost it up whatever.
If you're close to a creek, ultimately we do erosion control and we include putting down wattles. If you're close to a creek and you're concerned that might be a problem while you're doing this cleanup, put the wattles down first so that they will stop the water from flowing beyond that point. It'll act as a sediment basin basically, and just hold the water there. And then before you leave, pick up those wattles and the sediment behind it, put it in with the ash and debris. I don't know what your circumstances are, but we don't want it going in the creeks either.
That's why you also remove all the dirt that's on top, right?
That's
Get rid
right.
of all that, it'll end up being a filter.
That's correct. That's why you remove the dirt as well. Lots of properties, your properties probably look like this. Depends on whether you have cabinets and trailers. And it's amazing to me how much metal we've found on people's properties that are exposed from the fire. And the main reason we want to take the ash and debris and take it to a landfill, and we typically require you, I'll show you in the next slide, the contractor to use a plastic sheeting in the bed of their truck to fill it up with the ash and debris, and then they'll burrito wrap it inside the truck, and then put a tarp over on top of that to make sure that we limit any dust that can fly out on the highways going to the disposal site or on the roadways in the community. And then to limit the exposure, again, to the operators at the landfill, pushing the bulldozers and whatnot, because it's wetted down and it's wrapped up. It's protective measures for everybody to get exposed to it. So typically, we have found arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, cobalt, copper, mercury, thallium, vanadium, zinc, and asbestos in people's homes footprints. It's what's left after the fire just concentrates all these things down, that depending on what kind of equipment and materials you had in your home. And that's what we're guarding against. Those things getting in your lungs or you ingesting it can cause health issues. So it's a threat to public health and safety. The dust control is the main control of that, for getting into the environment. So the heavy plastic is put in the bed of the truck and then filled with the excavator and then wrapped, put a tarp on top of that and take it to the landfill. Concrete, some places, depending on the community, and I'm not familiar with the local concrete recyclers here in town. Some people will pay for it, some people will not, but they'll take it. Sometimes it can be left only if it wasn't exposed to the fire. There was no carb that burned on top of it. There was no heat exposure. If it was away from, we've had some houses that were under construction that had just a foundation built and no burnable materials in vicinity to it. It wasn't exposed to heat and potential fire damage. That's a very unusual case where we have in our operations allowed that concrete to stay. It's only concrete that's exposed to heat that you can't use for structural support for a new building. If it was not exposed, there's a possibility you can cut it off, and the non-exposed areas and take the rest of it away. The top 3 to 6 inches of soil is then removed to minimize the amount of ash and debris or heavy metals that might be in those soils. And the properties are left basically, they're supposed to be left off. This is how we typically would leave a property off without any deep holes. If the soil samples are taken after this, and the soil samples are taken. Your guidelines tell you how many samples you take per square foot of home or a footprint, and that's typically we'll do a die, 4 corners and the middle of each of those footprints, and combine those samples analyze that, see if it's a composite sample to see what the actual concentration or impact of that area was. We'll make decision units within each of these footprints, and we can talk about that a little bit more with the county. But that's how you know, in order to increase the number of samples that need to be analyzed, from 0 to 100 feet, you take one 5-point sample. That's the 5-point sample, the 4 corners in the middle. And if you've got 1 to 1,000 feet, you split, you take the footprint, cut it in half, and do 2 5-sample die, if you will, if that makes sense. And then take those 2 samples to be analyzed. Those results are compared to the cleanup goals, which are the health and safety. The other thing I should say is your professional, your engineer or geologist who will help you with the sampling plan will also design some locations, 3 locations outside the footprint of the burn area where there's no exposure to a structural burn. So that you know what your local geology is, because sometimes a lot of areas have unusual concentrations of arsenic or cobalt. Those are 2 key materials that we found in some of our areas here in California. Naturally occurring asbestos. Some of the granitic or semi-granitic rocks can provide asbestos too. We need to know. I'm not sure about Sonoma County. I haven't looked at it. The geology here, that's what will be helpful for taking these soil samples around the periphery, so you know what the local geology is to help you find your targets for the metals. If one of those soil areas do come up higher than the limits, then take another 6 inches of soil off just in that area that didn't pass, and take another set of soil samples until it's clean.
And the clean goal, is that regulatory on baselines, or are you using like screening levels, or what's the cleanup goal?
The cleanup goals are baseline for health and safety. They're in this program. The initial health screening criteria. The criteria can be moved upwards if there is local higher concentrations of these metals. So these are health concentrations limitations that we're trying to minimize exposure.
Those are really guidelines.
These are guidelines.
Those are required for the confirmation samples to be collected, or the background samples to be collected outside of the footprint.
Right. A combination of those that might adjust the concentrations in here if the local geology, the local metals are higher than these prescriptions.
And that's typically the case. Arsenic typically in Sonoma County runs against higher than health screening levels. So you're going to want those background samples to raise those levels so you can clear your problem.
Because you will never reach these goals because of background. And we're not trying to make it difficult. We're just trying to make you safe, as safe as you can be. So this is what I was just talking about as far as getting a licensed professional and the number of soil aliquots, sampling composite samples for size of your structures that burn down. All samples taken in the top 0 to 3 inches of soil. Then once you make your background samples, your background screening criteria, then typically we'll put down wattles down on the downstream side of the property, on the low end of the property, downstream of the structures to minimize any sediment that might want to wash off during the wet season. We typically then also hydro mulch, put organic hydro mulch down to keep the soil down during the wet season. If you're planning on constructing sooner than later. You don't need to do that. You can put straw down, put something down just to minimize the amount of erosion that can happen from your property. But a combination of straw or hydro mulch and wattles to minimize erosion from the property. Usually it's fairly flat where your structures work because you need it flat to build them. It's just on the outside edge of where you clean up the disturbed areas. Safety is key for any of these operations, and we want to make sure that we